Look down at your arm right now. Whatever color you're looking at, it isn't ancient, it isn't fixed. And depending on where your ancestors were living a few thousand years ago, it could easily have been something else entirely. For most of human history, every person alive had dark skin, every single one. Modern humans lived exclusively in Africa, under intense equatorial sun for the vast majority of our species' existence, and the paleontological and genetic evidence both point to dark pigmentation as the ancestral human condition. Then, in what amounts to a genetic eyeblink, once some populations began migrating into far less sunny latitudes tens of thousands of years later, some human populations didn't stay dark anymore. The reason has almost nothing to do with the things people usually assume it does, and almost everything to do with a molecule most people have never heard of, locked in a very old war with a vitamin, fought on the surface of your body for hundreds of thousands of years. You've probably never thought of your own skin as a battlefield. It is one. It just moves too slowly over too many generations for anyone to notice while it's happening. Let's start with the molecule. Melanin is the pigment that gives skin its color. More melanin, darker skin. Less, lighter. For a long time, the assumption was that darker skin evolved simply to block harmful ultraviolet radiation and prevent skin cancer. That's true, but it's incomplete and it doesn't explain why skin cancer, which mostly strikes after a person's reproductive years are over, would be a strong enough evolutionary pressure to shape something as visible as an entire species' pigmentation. Evolution doesn't act very efficiently on diseases that show up after someone has already had children. Something else had to be doing most of the work. The real answer took until the late 1990s to piece together, and it starts with a vitamin most people only think about when they're pregnant. In 2000, biological anthropologist Mina Jablonski, together with her husband and research partner George Chaplin, published a hypothesis that repositioned the entire question. Years earlier, researchers had discovered that strong ultraviolet exposure destroys folate in the human bloodstream, a B vitamin essential for DNA synthesis and, critically, for the healthy development of a fetus's spinal cord. Low folate during pregnancy dramatically raises the risk of neural tube defects. Jablonski and Chaplin's insight was that melanin isn't just sunscreen, it's a folate shield. Near the equator, where ultraviolet radiation is intense year-round, dark skin protects the body's folate supply and, by extension, reproductive success. Every population living close to the equator, going back to the earliest modern humans in Africa, would have faced overwhelming pressure to stay darkly pigmented. Which raises the obvious question, if that pressure is universal, why isn't everyone dark-skinned? Because folate isn't the only thing sunlight controls. Vitamin D is synthesized in the skin using ultraviolet light too, but in the opposite direction. Too little UV exposure, and the body can't make enough vitamin D, which leads to weakened bones, skeletal deformity, and, in severe cases, a fatally narrowed pelvis in women trying to give birth. This isn't theoretical. In the smog-choked, sun-starved cities of industrial-era Northern Europe, vitamin D deficiency caused rickets on a massive scale, bowing the legs and deforming the skeletons of an entire generation of children who simply weren't getting enough ultraviolet light to keep their own bones properly mineralized. Near the equator, there's more than enough UV to synthesize vitamin D even through heavy pigmentation. But as early humans migrated toward higher latitudes, sunlight grew weaker and more seasonal. Dark skin, once a life-saving shield, became a liability. Populations that lightened, allowing more UV through to keep vitamin D production running, had a survival advantage their darker-skinned relatives in the same regions didn't. Jablonski and Chaplin called it a dual cline. Two separate biological pressures pulling in opposite directions, mapped almost perfectly onto how much sunlight a given latitude receives. Skin color, in other words, isn't a marker of ancestry so much as a live readout of a multi-thousand-year negotiation between two vitamins. And that negotiation, it turns out, doesn't even land in the same place for everyone in the same population. Across virtually every human group ever studied, regardless of geography, women's skin is measurably lighter than men's. The leading explanation is the same trade-off, just personalized. Women need extra calcium and vitamin D during pregnancy and breastfeeding, so slightly lighter skin, letting in a bit more UV, may pay off in a way it doesn't for men. Men, meanwhile, may benefit from staying slightly darker, since folate, the exact vitamin dark skin protects, is also required for healthy sperm production. the same molecule, splitting the same population into two slightly different optimal settings, based on what each sex's biology needs most. But here's the part that gets stranger. In 2017, geneticist Sarah Tishkoff at the University of Pennsylvania led a study published in the journal Science that sequenced the genomes of thousands of people across the African continent, specifically looking for the genes responsible for skin color, in populations that had barely been studied by Western genetics at all up to that point. What her team found upended a lot of casual assumptions, including the one baked into the very question, why did humans become different colors? Africa itself, it turns out, contains the single widest range of human skin tones on Earth, a wider range than exists across the rest of the planet combined. Populations within a few hundred miles of each other range from skin as light as some East Asian populations to the darkest skin tones found anywhere in the world. The variation people assume exists between races mostly exists within one continent, among people whose ancestors never left it. And then came the truly unexpected part. Tishkoff's team found that several of the gene variants responsible for lighter skin were most common not in Europe, but in one of the oldest human populations on the planet, the San people of southern Africa, along with, separately, in Europeans. Meanwhile, some of the exact genetic variants linked to dark skin in Africans turned up, essentially unchanged, in South Asian and Melanesian populations on the other side of the planet. Tishkoff herself noted that many scientists had assumed these distant, dark-skinned populations evolved their pigmentation independently through convergent evolution. The genetics said otherwise. In several cases, they were carrying the same ancient variant, inherited rather than reinvented. So some of the light skin genetic toolkit is ancient and African. Some of the dark skin genetic toolkit shows up, essentially unmodified, on opposite sides of the globe. The tidy picture where skin color maps onto continents, or worse, onto races, simply isn't how the biology works. Except, in at least one place, convergent evolution really did happen. It just happened somewhere else. When separate groups of humans migrated out of Africa into Europe and into East Asia, both populations independently evolved lighter skin as they moved into lower UV environments. But they didn't use the same genetic solution to get there. A gene called SLC24A5 accounts for a large share of the lighter skin seen in Europeans. That same gene plays essentially no role in the lighter skin of East Asian populations, who reached a similar outcome through different mutations entirely, in a different gene called OCA2 on a different timeline. Researchers dated the European SLC24A5 variant's spread to somewhere between 22,000 and 28,000 years ago. Evolutionarily speaking, almost no time at all. Two populations, thousands of miles apart, arrived at a similar shade of skin using completely different genetic paths, on a timescale barely longer than the history of agriculture. So why did humans become different colors? Not because different groups of people are separated by some deep, ancient biological divide. The opposite. Skin color turns out to be one of the fastest changing, most locally reactive traits the human body has. A trait that can shift, reverse, and re-evolve independently within a few hundred generations whenever a population's latitude changes enough. It tracks sunlight, not lineage. It's closer to a suntan playing out over millennia than it is to a family tree. Every other measure geneticists actually use to track deep human ancestry, buried deep in the genome, in places that have nothing to do with sun exposure, tells a completely different story than skin color does. By those measures, two people with similar skin tones can be more genetically distant from each other than either of them is from someone on the other side of the planet with completely different pigmentation. Skin color is loud, it's visible from across a room, and it is almost uniquely bad among human traits at actually representing how related two people are. Which means the color of your skin right now is telling you something true, just not the thing most people assume. It's not a record of deep ancestry or fixed biological difference. It's a snapshot, mid-negotiation, between a fetus's need for folate, a skeleton's need for vitamin D, and even the slightly different math your body runs depending on whether it's built to carry a pregnancy or protect sperm, still being renegotiated every time a population moves somewhere the sun behaves differently. Your ancestors, wherever they lived, spent thousands of years being slowly rewritten by whatever light happened to fall on them. So did everyone else's. The species never split into different colors, the way a family tree splits into branches. It just kept adjusting, in place, over and over, everywhere humans went, all reacting to the same star, using whatever genetic tools happened to be lying around at the time. Look down at your arm again. What you're seeing isn't where you came from. It's just the most recent setting in an argument your body has been having with the sun since long before anyone thought to write any of it down.